Your father just told me he's been sleeping with his secretary for 2 years, and he's leaving us tonight. The champagne flute in my hand didn't even tremble as I whispered these words to myself in the powder room mirror, practicing the calm I'd need to maintain for the next 4 hours. Outside, 300 wedding guests were gathering to watch my daughter Victoria marry the man of her dreams. And my husband, the man I'd devoted 30 years to, had just chosen this sacred moment to detonate our life together. I'm Eleanor Mitchell, 58 years old, and until 60 seconds ago, I believed I was living a fairy tale. Our colonial mansion in Savannah, Georgia, gleamed under the afternoon sun, draped in white roses and baby's breath. My daughter looked ethereal in her great-grandmother's wedding dress. Everything was perfect, except for the fact that my husband David had just leaned over during the processional music and whispered 8 words that shattered 3 decades of marriage. I'm leaving tonight, my bags are already packed. But here's what David didn't know. I'd been expecting this moment for 6 months, and I was ready. The warning signs had started last winter, subtle as frost on glass. David began working late with suspicious regularity. His wardrobe transformed from comfortable polos to Italian suits that made him look like a silver-haired movie star. The man who once forgot our anniversary 3 years running suddenly became meticulous about his appearance, using cologne that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. At first, I'd blamed it on turning 60. Men did foolish things when mortality tapped them on the shoulder. But then came the credit card statements with charges at jewelry stores, pieces I never received, restaurant bills for intimate dinners on nights he'd claimed to be in budget meetings, a hotel charge in downtown Savannah when he was supposedly at a conference in Jacksonville. Sarah Chen, his 29-year-old assistant, had joined Mitchell Commercial Properties 18 months ago. Fresh from business school, ambitious, and stunning in that effortless way that made other women feel instantly inadequate. I'd met her at the company Christmas party, where she'd gushed about how much she was learning from David, how brilliant he was, how lucky she felt to work so closely with such a successful man. The way she'd touched his arm when she said it. The way he'd smiled at her enthusiasm. I should have known then. But the real shock came 3 months ago when I discovered something that would change everything. I'd been organizing tax documents in David's home office when I found a bank statement for an account I didn't recognize. Summit Private Holdings, LLC. The balance made my breath catch. $1.8 million systematically transferred from our joint investments over the past year. My hands shook as I photographed every page. This wasn't just an affair. This was theft. That night, while David attended another urgent client dinner, I made 2 phone calls that would seal his fate. The first was to Margaret Sterling, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Georgia. The second was to James Porter, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. Mrs. Mitchell, Margaret had said after reviewing my preliminary findings, your husband isn't just cheating. He's committing systematic financial abuse. We're going to destroy him. Those words echoed in my mind as I returned to the wedding ceremony, sliding into my seat beside David with practiced grace. Victoria stood at the altar, radiant with joy, exchanging vows with Marcus beneath an arch of gardenias. The photographer captured what must have looked like the perfect family moment, David and I sitting side by side, the picture of marital success. You look beautiful today, David whispered, reaching for my hand. The audacity of it, complimenting me while planning his escape with another woman, nearly broke my composure. Thank you, darling, I whispered back, lacing my fingers through his. By the way, I had the locks changed on the house this morning. I felt him stiffen beside me, but the ceremony continued. Victoria's voice rang clear. I promise to love you through every challenge life brings. If only she knew the challenge her parents were facing at that very moment. During the photography session, David played his role flawlessly, his arm around my waist, his smile warm and genuine for the cameras. But I could feel the tension radiating from him, the desperate need to ask about the locks, about what I knew. He couldn't, of course. Not with Victoria glowing beside us, not with 300 guests watching our every move. The reception was held in our garden, where fairy lights twinkled between ancient oak trees. I'd spent months planning every detail, From the jazz quartet to the seven-tier cake decorated with sugar magnolias, Sarah Chen sat at table 12, wearing a crimson dress that was far too bold for a subordinate attending her boss's family wedding. She kept glancing at David, probably wondering why he looked increasingly pale as the evening progressed. What neither of them knew was that Margaret Sterling was sitting at table 4, disguised as my college roommate. James Porter was there too, posing as a family friend from Charlotte. They were documenting everything, every glance between David and Sarah, every nervous gesture, every whispered conversation. The father-daughter dance nearly undid me. David held Victoria as they swayed to "The Way You Look Tonight," the same song we'd danced to at our own wedding. He whispered something that made her laugh, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with 3 decades ago. The man who'd held my hand through labor pains, who'd taught Victoria to ride a bike, who'd promised to love me until death do us part. Then I watched him check his phone and saw Sarah do the same seconds later. The spell broke. During his father of the bride speech, David waxed poetic about love, commitment, and the sacred bonds of marriage. "Eleanor and I have built something beautiful over 30 years, he said, raising his champagne glass. "We've weathered every storm together, and our love has only grown stronger. Victoria, this is what I wish for you and Marcus, a love that endures, that forgives, that never gives up." The crowd erupted in applause. Several guests wiped away tears. I smiled and accepted their congratulations on raising such a wonderful daughter, on maintaining such a strong marriage. If they only knew that David had already signed a lease on a luxury apartment across town, that he'd been funneling our retirement savings into accounts I wasn't supposed to know about, that right now, at this very moment, he believed his suitcases were waiting in his car, ready for his grand exit. The twist he didn't see coming? I'd had those suitcases delivered to Margaret Sterling's office 2 hours ago. As the evening wore on, David grew increasingly agitated. He excused himself repeatedly, probably trying to reach the friend who was supposed to be guarding his escape supplies. Each time he returned, his smile was a little more strained, his laughter a little more forced. "Is everything all right, darling?" I asked during a brief moment alone. "Of course," he replied, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Just wanting to make sure Victoria's day is perfect." "Oh, it is," I assured him. "Absolutely perfect." The cake cutting provided another surreal moment. David and I stood behind Victoria and Marcus, guiding their hands as they made the first slice. The photographer captured our united front, our seeming joy. I wondered if he'd notice later, when reviewing the images, how David's knuckles were white as he gripped the knife. Sarah approached us during the dessert service, her courage apparently bolstered by champagne. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell," she gushed, "what a beautiful wedding! You must be so proud." "We are," I replied warmly, noting how she avoided meeting my eyes. "Tell me, Sarah, will you be staying with the company long? David mentioned you might be pursuing other opportunities." The color drained from her face. David's hand found my elbow, squeezing slightly. A warning. "I'm very happy where I am," Sarah stammered before excusing herself. "What was that about?" David hissed once she was out of earshot. "Just making conversation," I said innocently. "You did mention she was talented. I'd hate to lose such a valuable employee." The real revelation came during the final hour of the reception. While guests danced and laughed, David pulled me aside into the rose garden, away from prying eyes and ears. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said urgently. "About what I said earlier. You mean about leaving me for your secretary?" I kept my voice light, conversational. "Or about the $1.8 million you've stolen from our joint accounts." The words hit him like physical blows. He actually staggered backward, his face cycling through shock, denial, and finally, rage. "You've been spying on me?" "No, darling. I've been protecting myself." "Me." I pulled out my phone, showing him a PDF of the legal documents I'd filed. "The forensic accountants were particularly impressed by your creativity. Fake consulting fees, inflated business expenses, even a phantom property investment. You've been quite busy." His mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Eleanor, I can explain." I'm sure you can. You'll have plenty of opportunity to explain to the judge, the IRS, and the state fraud investigators. I smoothed my dress, maintaining perfect composure. Did you really think I was that stupid, David? That I'd spent 30 years managing our finances and wouldn't notice nearly $2 million disappearing? This is vindictive, he snarled, the mask finally slipping completely. You're trying to destroy me out of jealousy. No, I corrected him. I'm protecting what's mine, what I've earned, what our daughter deserves to inherit. You chose destruction the moment you started stealing from your family to fund your midlife crisis. The band struck up another song, and laughter drifted over from the reception tent. Such a stark contrast to the drama unfolding in the shadows. What do you want? David asked, defeat creeping into his voice. I want you to walk back into that reception and continue playing the devoted father until the last guest leaves, I said calmly. I want Victoria to remember her wedding as perfect. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with my attorney to sign the divorce papers I've prepared. You'll return every penny you've stolen, plus interest. In exchange, I won't press criminal charges that would destroy your reputation and land you in federal prison. And if I refuse? I smiled then, the kind of smile I'd perfected over 3 decades of corporate dinners and charity galas. Then by Monday morning, every client, every colleague, every country club member will know exactly what kind of man David Mitchell really is. The FBI will freeze your accounts, your business will crumble, and Sarah Chen will discover that the wealthy businessman she's been sleeping with is actually a soon-to-be felon with no assets and no future. The transformation was complete, from confident predator to cornered prey. David's shoulders sagged as he realized the totality of his defeat. The man who'd whispered his cruel announcement during our daughter's sacred moment now understood that he'd been dancing to my tune for months without knowing it. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Since March. Every move you've made since then has been documented, photographed, and legally recorded. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the cologne he'd bought to impress his mistress. You gave me 6 months to prepare, David. 6 months to consult lawyers, hire investigators, and restructure our assets. Did you really think I'd spent 30 years as your partner without learning how to protect myself? We returned to the reception separately, both wearing perfect smiles. David gave the final toast of the evening, his voice only slightly strained as he wished Victoria and Marcus a lifetime of happiness. I stood beside him, the supportive wife one last time, while Margaret Sterling and James Porter captured every moment for the record. As the newlyweds prepared for their grand exit, Victoria pulled me aside. Mom, you look so beautiful tonight. Dad seems a little off, though. Is everything okay? I hugged my daughter tightly, breathing in her perfume, memorizing this moment before everything changed. Everything is perfect, sweetheart. This has been the wedding of your dreams. I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything. I love you too, baby, more than you'll ever know. The guests formed 2 lines holding sparklers, creating a tunnel of light for Victoria and Marcus to run through toward their decorated car. David and I stood at the beginning of the line, waving and smiling as our daughter disappeared into her new life, blissfully unaware of the bomb about to detonate in ours. After the last guest departed and the catering staff finished packing up, David and I stood alone among the remnants of Victoria's perfect day. Crumpled napkins and rose petals littered the ground. Empty champagne bottles caught the moonlight. The fairy tale was over. My bags? He asked simply. With my attorney, along with copies of every document related to your fraud. Every text message to Sarah. Every secret credit card statement. I picked up my purse, ready to leave him standing in the ruins of his own making. The locks have been changed, the security codes updated, and your access to all accounts has been terminated. Sarah's apartment lease, the one you co-signed, has been forwarded to her employer's board of directors. You've destroyed everything, he said, his voice hollow. No, David. You destroyed everything. I just documented it. I walked away then, leaving him in the garden where we'd hosted our own wedding reception 30 years ago. My heels clicked on the stone path with satisfying finality. Behind me, I heard him collapse onto a chair, probably calculating exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. The next morning, while Victoria and Marcus flew to their honeymoon in Santorini, David met with Margaret Sterling to review the divorce settlement. She later told me he'd aged 10 years overnight, his confident demeanor replaced by desperate bargaining. "Your client is offering extremely generous terms," Margaret informed him. "Considering the evidence of embezzlement, adultery, and fraud, she could take everything. Instead, she's allowing you to keep the business and enough assets to start over, provided you meet her conditions." Those conditions were simple but devastating: full financial restitution, immediate divorce, no contact with Victoria until after Eleanor chose to explain the situation, and complete confidentiality about the terms of the settlement. David signed without argument, probably realizing that prison would be far worse than starting over. Sarah Chen disappeared from Savannah within a week, her dreams of marrying a wealthy businessman evaporating when she discovered her prince was actually a fraud facing financial ruin. The apartment David had leased for their love nest became evidence in the divorce proceedings. The jewelry he'd bought her had to be returned and liquidated to pay back the stolen funds. But the true reckoning came 3 weeks later, when the business community learned that David Mitchell was quietly stepping back from his company's daily operations. Word spread, as word always does in tight-knit social circles. His golf buddies stopped calling. His country club membership lapsed. The man who'd built an empire on trust and relationships found himself persona non grata in the only world he'd ever valued. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding my life with surprising joy. The divorce settlement left me financially secure and emotionally free. I started taking art classes, something I'd abandoned when David insisted I focus on supporting his career. I traveled to Paris with my sister, drinking wine at cafes and laughing like teenagers. I discovered that life after betrayal could be not just bearable, but beautiful. Victoria learned the truth 2 months after her wedding, when she noticed her father's absence from family gatherings. I told her gently, cushioning the blow as much as possible, but she surprised me with her response. "I knew something was wrong at the wedding," she admitted. "The way Dad kept checking his phone, the way that woman in the red dress kept staring at him. I just hoped I was imagining it." "I wanted your day to be perfect," I explained. "You deserved that." "You protected me," she said, tears streaming. "Even while your world was falling apart, you protected me. That's the kind of love I want to have, the kind that sacrifices for others." The epilogue to this story came 6 months later, when I received a letter from David. He was living in a modest apartment in Jacksonville, working as a consultant for a fraction of his former income. Sarah had left him for a younger executive with better prospects. His reputation was ruined, his fortune depleted, his family lost. "I realize now what I threw away," he wrote. 30 years of partnership, love, and trust, destroyed for a fantasy that was never real. You were right to protect yourself. I'm sorry for the pain I caused and the man I became." I read the letter once, then fed it to the fireplace. Apologies couldn't undo betrayal. Regret couldn't rebuild trust. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay ash. As I write this, a year has passed since Victoria's wedding. She and Marcus are expecting their first child, a daughter they plan to name Eleanor. The garden where David announced his betrayal now hosts Sunday brunches with my book club. The house that once echoed with lies has become a sanctuary of truth and renewal. Sometimes the most devastating endings are actually beginnings in disguise. David thought he was escaping to freedom that night, never realizing he was actually freeing me. He planned his exit with the confidence of a man who'd never been challenged, never been outsmarted, never been held accountable. But after 30 years of marriage, I knew him better than he knew himself. I knew his arrogance would blind him to my capabilities. I knew his greed would make him careless with our assets, and I knew his ego would never let him imagine that his quiet, supportive wife was actually a force to be reckoned with. He chose our daughter's wedding to end our marriage, thinking the public setting would protect him from my reaction. Instead, It became the stage for his complete downfall. The woman who'd spent 3 decades in his shadow stepped into the light and showed him exactly what he'd underestimated. And in the end, that was his greatest miscalculation. Not the affair, not the theft, not even the cruelty of his timing. It was believing that I was weak, when in truth, I was just waiting for him to reveal his true character, waiting for the evidence to be undeniable, waiting for the perfect moment to show him that the mouse he'd taken for granted was actually a lioness in disguise. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I prefer to think of it as justice served with a smile. The same smile I wore throughout Victoria's wedding, knowing that every picture would capture the moment before David Mitchell's carefully constructed life came crashing down. And that, perhaps, is the greatest irony of all. He wanted to be remembered as the successful businessman, the devoted father, the man who had it all. Instead, he'll forever be the fool who announced his affair at his daughter's wedding, never realizing his wife had already written the ending to their story. Some might call me calculating, others might say vindictive, but I prefer to think of myself as a woman who refused to be a victim, who turned betrayal into triumph, who proved that sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living well while your ex-husband lives with the consequences of his choices. After all, he wanted a new life. I simply made sure he got exactly what he deserved,